This is the unknown zone, where truth hides in the shadows of history. Tonight, we uncover the most secret, strange and disturbing chapter of World War II, the story of how the Nazi regime turned myth into ideology and faith into a weapon. This is Nazi occult research, Hitler's obsession with ancient power. The story of the Nazi obsession with the occult did not begin on the battlefields of Europe. It began in the drawing rooms, lodges, and secret societies of Germany, long before Adolf Hitler seized power. In the late 19th century, Germany was a nation searching for identity. It had been unified only in 1871, a collection of kingdoms and cultures bound together by politics, not by shared belief. And in that vacuum, a strange kind of nationalism began to grow, one that mixed history, mysticism, and mythology into something darkly intoxicating. In that period, many Germans were fascinated by the ancient past. Archaeology was uncovering lost civilizations in Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia. But for certain thinkers, those discoveries weren't just science. They were symbols. They began to believe that the true origins of the so-called Aryan race lay in some forgotten golden age, a vanished civilization of immense power and purity. Out of that belief came an entire culture of mysticism, a web of secret societies, spiritual movements, and racial ideologies that would eventually shape the worldview of Adolf Hitler himself. One of the earliest of these groups was the Germanenorden, or Order of the Teutons, founded in 1912. It combined nationalism, anti-Semitism, and pseudo-religious rituals drawn from ancient Germanic myths. Members wore robes, conducted initiations by candlelight, and used runic symbols that would later appear in the iconography of the SS. It was a brotherhood that believed Germany's destiny could be restored by reconnecting to its mythical past. From the Germanenorden came another, even more influential organization, the Thule Society. Named after the legendary island of Thule, said to be the ancient homeland of the Aryan race, the Thule Society was founded in Munich in 1918. It brought together wealthy industrialists, writers, and occultists who mixed politics with mysticism. They studied Nordic myths, ancient symbols, and esoteric philosophy. They believed that history was not random, but guided by cosmic forces, and that the German people were chosen to lead humanity into a new age. Among those who attended Thule Society meetings were men who would later help found the Nazi Party. The society funded the German Workers' Party, which in 1920 was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP. Its early propaganda drew heavily from the Thule ideology, combining racial purity, mythic destiny, and a hatred of what they saw as the forces of degeneration. Although Hitler himself never officially joined the Thule Society, he was deeply influenced by its ideas. Its members became some of his earliest political allies, and its language of destiny, blood, and sacred mission became the vocabulary of his rise to power. To Hitler, the mythic past was not just history, it was prophecy. He saw himself not as a politician, but as the instrument of a divine force, the one chosen to restore what had been lost. By the 1930s, when Hitler had consolidated power, these occult beliefs began to move from the fringes of German society into the very heart of the Nazi state. The man most responsible for that transformation was Heinrich Himmler. To the world, Himmler was the ruthless head of the SS, the architect of terror and genocide. But behind the uniform, he was also a believer in something far older and stranger. Himmler saw himself as the spiritual leader of a new Germanic religion. He believed the SS was not merely a police force, but a knightly order, heirs to the Teutonic Knights and guardians of the Aryan soul. Under his direction, the SS adopted rituals, symbols, and ceremonies that mimicked medieval and pagan traditions. Its insignia, the twin lightning bolt runes, were derived from ancient Norse alphabets. Its motto, "My honor is loyalty," carried the weight of sacred oath. But Himmler wanted more than symbols. He wanted proof. He wanted to show that the myths of Aryan superiority were grounded in real history. And so, he created an organization unlike any other in the modern world. In 1935, Himmler founded the Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society. Its official purpose was to study the archaeological and cultural history of the so-called Aryan race. But behind that academic facade lay a far more ambitious goal: to uncover evidence of a forgotten civilization that could legitimize Nazi ideology. The Ahnenerbe brought together scientists, archaeologists, historians, and mystics. They conducted excavations across Germany, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, searching for artifacts and symbols that could be linked to ancient Germanic peoples. They studied runes, folklore, and sagas, trying to weave a continuous story from prehistory to the Third Reich. But their research quickly expanded beyond Europe. Himmler believed that traces of the Aryan race might be found in the most remote corners of the earth. He ordered expeditions to the Himalayas, the Arctic, and even Tibet, all in search of the origins of human civilization. To Himmler and those around him, the occult was not fantasy. It was science waiting to be rediscovered. They believed that ancient peoples possessed knowledge, spiritual, technological, and cosmic, that had been lost to time. If that knowledge could be recovered, it could make Germany invincible. Within SS headquarters, rooms were filled with maps, relics, and symbols. Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia became Himmler's personal sanctuary, redesigned as the spiritual center of the SS order. Its great hall, shaped like a sunwheel, was meant to serve as a temple for rituals honoring the mythical ancestors of the Aryan race. Every architectural detail carried hidden meaning. The geometry of the floors, the placement of the windows, the orientation of the walls. It was meant to be both fortress and shrine. For Hitler, these ideas served a different purpose. He saw in them a tool, a way to unite a fractured nation under a shared mythology. He used the language of destiny, symbols of the past, and the illusion of sacred purpose to create a movement that felt eternal. The swastika, an ancient symbol found across cultures, became the emblem of the Reich, not because of its history, but because of its emotional power. It was the perfect fusion of ancient mysticism and modern propaganda. By merging myth with politics, the Nazi regime created something the world had never seen before, a state that ruled not only through fear, but through faith. Faith in blood, destiny, and power. But belief built on illusion is fragile. As the war progressed, the line between ideology and madness began to blur. The search for mystical relics became an obsession. The Ahnenerbe's expeditions grew bolder, stranger, and more desperate. They weren't just seeking history anymore. They were chasing immortality. That pursuit would take them to the ends of the earth, to ancient temples, frozen mountains, and forgotten ruins, in search of the keys to a power that never existed. When Heinrich Himmler founded the Ahnenerbe in 1935, he didn't just create a research institute. He created a crusade. Its mission was to uncover evidence of the Aryan race's mythical past, to find the roots of German destiny hidden somewhere in the deep, forgotten corners of the world. But this was not an academic pursuit. It was spiritual warfare, fought with maps, myths, and ambition. The men of the Ahnenerbe believed they were restoring history that had been stolen. Every artifact they found, every legend they studied, was another step toward proving that the Germanic peoples were not just a race, but the descendants of a divine civilization that had once ruled the earth. In the early years, the Ahnenerbe focused its work inside Germany. Teams of researchers combed through ancient burial sites, pagan temples, and medieval cathedrals. They studied runes, folk songs, and the architecture of old churches, searching for hidden symbolism that might point to a deeper pre-Christian heritage. Himmler believed Christianity was a distortion, a faith that had replaced the true religion of the ancient Aryans. He saw in the Norse sagas and the pagan rituals of old Europe a purer form of belief, one based on blood, nature, and struggle. To him, archaeology was not about the past. It was about resurrection. But soon, the boundaries of Europe were not enough. The Ahnenerbe's ambitions grew global. They began to look beyond Germany, beyond Europe, toward the places where the oldest myths of mankind had been born. In 1938, Himmler approved one of the most famous expeditions in Ahnenerbe history, a journey to Tibet. Led by zoologist and anthropologist Ernst Schaefer, the expedition was officially described as a scientific study of the region's flora, fauna, and geography. But its true purpose was far more unusual. Himmler and the Ahnenerbe believed Tibet might be the cradle of the ancient Aryans, the lost homeland of the so-called master race. According to a mix of myth and pseudoscience popular among Nazi occultists, the Aryans were thought to have originated in a vanished northern civilization, a place sometimes called Atlantis, sometimes Hyperborea. Some believed the survivors of that world had fled into Asia, settling in Tibet, where they preserved their wisdom in secret. To Himmler, the myths of Tibet, its hidden valleys, its gods, its rituals, were not stories. They were clues. In June 1938, Schaefer's team departed for Asia. They carried with them not just cameras and notebooks, but measuring instruments, skull calipers, and racial charts. Their goal was to document the Tibetan people, landscapes, and monuments, to look for physical and cultural traces of an ancient Aryan presence. When the team arrived in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, they were received with curiosity and suspicion. Tibet had long been isolated from the outside world, and the sight of European scientists in Nazi uniforms caused unease. But Schaefer, who had previously explored the region, used his charm and scientific credentials to gain limited access. The team conducted studies on local populations, measuring skulls and facial features, photographing temples, statues, and religious symbols. They collected manuscripts, seeds, and artifacts. To the Tibetan monks, it was strange curiosity. To Himmler, it was evidence, however weak, that ancient wisdom still lived beneath the Himalayas. While Schaefer's reports were cautious and scientific, Himmler's interpretations were anything but. When the expedition returned to Germany in 1939, he received them with ceremony and praise. He saw their journey as a sacred mission completed, a confirmation of his belief that the Aryan soul had once ruled the East. Inside SS circles, rumors spread that the expedition had discovered hidden tunnels, secret texts, and even contact with mystical lamas guarding ancient power. None of these claims were true. But in the fevered imagination of the Reich, they didn't need to be. Belief was enough. The Ahnenerbe search didn't end in Tibet. Himmler ordered similar missions across the world. Teams were sent to Iceland, searching for traces of Thule, the legendary homeland of the Aryans. They studied runestones, folklore, and geological formations, looking for signs of a lost civilization beneath the ice. Others explored Finland, Norway, and Sweden, mapping ancient sacred sites and collecting stories of gods, giants, and heroes. They claimed these legends preserved memories of real prehistoric events, a time when the ancestors of the Germans had ruled the northern world. Even the Canary Islands and South America became targets of interest. Some within the Ahnenerbe speculated that ancient transoceanic voyages had carried Aryan knowledge to distant continents, influencing the civilizations of the Maya and the Inca. It was a wild mixture of archaeology, myth, and fantasy, but it was funded, organized, and backed by the state. By the early 1940s, the Ahnenerbe had grown into a vast network of researchers, explorers, and ideologues. It had over 50 departments covering everything from linguistics to astronomy. Its projects ranged from excavations in Germany to studies of astrology and ancient technologies. One division studied the Holy Grail, believing it might be hidden somewhere in Europe as a relic of the Aryan faith. Another studied runic magic, claiming ancient symbols could channel spiritual energy. Still others examined megalithic structures like Stonehenge, arguing that they were not built by primitive tribes, but by a lost civilization with superior knowledge. To the outside world, it looked absurd, but inside the Reich, these studies were taken seriously. Himmler's influence made the Ahnenerbe untouchable. Its reports circulated among high-ranking officials. Its discoveries, or inventions, were used to justify Nazi racial policies and expansionist ideology. If the Aryans had once ruled the world, Himmler argued, then their descendants had the right, even the duty, to rule it again. As the war escalated, the Ahnenerbe's expeditions became increasingly dangerous and desperate. The front lines moved closer to the heart of Europe, and many projects were abandoned. But Himmler's obsession only deepened. He ordered excavations in occupied territories, Poland, Ukraine, Greece, searching for ancient relics that could prove the spiritual superiority of the German race. Some SS officers even looted museums and monasteries, sending stolen artifacts back to Germany for study or display at Wewelsburg Castle. The line between science, superstition, and theft vanished completely. In those final years, before Germany's downfall, the Ahnenerbe had become a paradox, a place where brilliant scholars and delusional mystics worked side by side, each convinced they were uncovering the secret laws of history. But the truth was darker. The search for ancient knowledge had become a mirror of the regime itself, driven by pride, corrupted by ideology, and blinded by its own myths. While millions suffered on the battlefields and in the camps, the SS spent its resources chasing ghosts in the mountains of Tibet and the ruins of Europe, believing salvation could be found not in morality or reason, but in the ashes of forgotten gods. The Ahnenerbe's expeditions produced little of real scientific value, yet their influence would outlive the war. The myths they created of hidden civilizations, lost technologies, and sacred relics would inspire generations of writers, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists. From the legends of Nazi occultism to the fantasies of secret Arctic bases, the seeds planted by Himmler's scholars would grow into an entire forest of post-war mythology. The line between truth and myth had been erased, and in that void, stories would live forever. Long before the Second World War began, Adolf Hitler visited Vienna's Hofburg Museum. It was 1913. He was a struggling artist, unknown and poor, wandering through the galleries filled with imperial treasures. Among the ancient relics and royal regalia, one object caught his eye. A long, slender spearhead, blackened with age, encased in glass and legend. The museum called it the Spear of Destiny, also known as the Holy Lance, the weapon that, according to Christian tradition, had pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. For centuries, it had been said that whoever possessed the spear would hold the fate of the world in his hands. It was a relic of both faith and power, touched by the divine, capable of granting victory to its bearer. Hitler stood before it for hours. He would later speak of that moment as a kind of awakening, as if he had glimpsed a destiny that was waiting for him. Whether he truly believed in its supernatural power or used it as a symbol of imperial greatness, the spear became part of his mythology. And when he rose to power 2 decades later, that same relic would once again come into his possession. This time, not as a dream, but as a trophy. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, the Spear of Destiny was seized from Vienna and transported to Nuremberg, the symbolic heart of the Nazi movement. It was placed in a church near the rally grounds, where it became a quiet centerpiece of Hitler's vision of divine legitimacy. To the public, it was a relic of empire. To the inner circle of the Reich, it was something more. A confirmation that history itself had chosen them. But the spear was only one of many relics that fascinated the Nazi leadership. The search for sacred objects was part of a larger obsession, to prove that power was not merely political or military, but spiritual. Heinrich Himmler, already consumed by his belief in ancient Germanic faiths, pursued his own version of the Holy Grail. In his mind, the Grail was not a Christian relic, but a pre-Christian symbol, a vessel of hidden knowledge, perhaps even a source of eternal life. He ordered researchers within the Ahnenerbe to study medieval legends, especially those connected to the Grail stories of Wolfram von Eschenbach, a 13th century poet who wrote of knights, purity, and divine inheritance. Himmler believed these tales concealed the memory of a real event, a sacred lineage that connected the ancient Aryans to divine energy. And he believed the Grail, if rediscovered, could serve as proof of that divine connection. His quest led to one of the most curious missions of the war, the search for the Grail in southern France. In the Pyrenees, near the village of Montségur, stood the ruins of a Gatha fortress. The Gathas were a medieval sect condemned as heretics by the Catholic Church in the 13th century. They believed in dualism, a world divided between light and darkness, spirit and flesh. To Himmler, their story held echoes of the ancient Aryan faith he was trying to reconstruct. He sent Ahnenerbe agents to explore the region, searching for evidence that the Cathars had preserved a relic of divine power, possibly the Grail itself. The locals watched as German officers studied caves and ruins, taking soil samples, measuring walls, and sketching carvings. they found nothing. But once again, the absence of proof became proof itself. To Himmler, the Grail remained hidden, a symbol of purity still waiting to be reclaimed. The Nazi fascination with relics did not stop there. Throughout occupied Europe, SS officers looted monasteries, cathedrals, and museums, taking not just gold and art, but relics of saints, icons, and manuscripts. Himmler's staff catalogued each item, often claiming they were retrieving Germanic treasures lost through history. In truth, they were searching for anything that could be woven into the myth of Aryan destiny. Even ancient swords, chalices, and fragments of stone were imbued with symbolic importance. They were treated not as history, but as keys, each one a step closer to unlocking the secrets of divine power. At the heart of all this stood Wewelsburg Castle, Himmler's fortress of faith. He envisioned it as the spiritual center of the SS, a place where the new Germanic religion would be born. The castle was redesigned according to occult geometry, its halls aligned to the stars, its floors inlaid with runic symbols. At its center stood a circular chamber, known as the Obergruppenführersaal, the Hall of the Supreme Leaders. 12 seats surrounded a black sun emblem carved into the floor, a symbol representing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Here, Himmler imagined the SS not as soldiers, but as holy knights, guardians of a mystical order that would outlast the war itself. In his mind, the castle was the new Camelot, and he was its Arthur. But the Grail they sought was never found, because the power they searched for was never real. As the war turned against Germany, the relics became a refuge, a way for the Nazi leadership to deny the truth. They believed that if they could recover one last symbol of divine power, the tide could somehow be reversed. In the ruins of Berlin, even as the Red Army closed in, Hitler reportedly ordered the Spear of Destiny to be moved from Nuremberg to a secret location. Some accounts claim it was hidden deep underground. Others say it was captured by Allied forces and returned to Austria after the war. Its exact fate remains uncertain, though the spear in Vienna's Hofburg Museum today is claimed to be the same one. But by then, its power, whatever it symbolized, had already failed. After the fall of the Third Reich, historians and theologians tried to untangle the strange mixture of myth, magic, and manipulation that defined Nazi ideology. Some dismissed it as mere propaganda. Others saw it as something far more disturbing, a deliberate attempt to fuse faith and fanaticism into a single force. Because for Hitler and Himmler, belief was not a matter of religion. It was a weapon. It was a way to turn myth into law and faith into obedience. They didn't need to find the Spear of Destiny or the Holy Grail. They only needed the world to believe they had. That belief gave them power. It gave millions of Germans a sense of purpose in chaos. It wrapped conquest in the language of destiny and cruelty in the illusion of divine will. In the end, the relics they sought were never found, but the myths they created proved far more enduring. Even today, stories of hidden Nazi treasures, secret relics, and occult experiments persist. Echoes of a regime that tried to make fantasy into faith and faith into control. Inside the Third Reich, there existed two worlds. One was visible, the military parades, the speeches, the industrial war machine. The other was hidden, built of symbols, rituals, and beliefs that reached far deeper than politics. It was this hidden world, the occult heart of the Reich, that Heinrich Himmler tried to shape into a new religion. To understand what he built, you must first imagine what he wanted. He saw Germany not as a modern nation, but as the rebirth of an ancient order, guided by blood and destiny. The SS, his creation, was meant to be its priesthood. Every emblem, every oath, every uniform was chosen to serve that purpose. The black SS tunic was designed to recall the robes of a monk and the armor of a knight. The twin lightning bolt runes on the collar were drawn from the ancient Wewelsburg rune, a symbol of the sun and victory. The skull badge, the Totenkopf, was borrowed from old Prussian regiments, but reimagined as a reminder of sacrifice and eternal duty. The SS ring, carved with runes and a death's head, was meant to be kept as a relic. When a member died, it was returned to Himmler and stored within a stone chest in Wewelsburg Castle. Himmler called the castle the center of the world. He built it with the precision of a ritual architect. The North Tower contained the Obergruppenführersaal, a circular chamber lit from above, its floor inlaid with a 12-spoked black sun. 12 seats were reserved for the highest SS leaders, mirroring the round table of Arthurian legend. Beneath it, a vault known as the crypt was built, a low chamber lined in stone where the air was thick and still. In its center, a shallow pit waited for an eternal flame that was never lit. Meetings there were rare and secretive. Witnesses later recalled that Himmler spoke of the SS as a new knightly order, united not by religion, but by blood. Each man, he said, was a link in the chain of rebirth, carrying the essence of his ancestors into a purified future. They were to live by the ancient virtues of loyalty, courage, and obedience, virtues drawn not from scripture, but from myth. Outside Wewelsburg, these ideas shaped every ceremony of the SS. Weddings were conducted before runic banners instead of Christian crosses. Children born to SS families were named in midnight rituals that invoked the gods of the North. Even the calendar was rewritten. Festivals of the sun replaced Christmas and Easter, echoing the solstices of pagan Europe. The old faiths were not merely replaced, they were rewritten to serve the state. In Berlin, the Ahnenerbe supported these efforts with research. Its scholars studied astrology, rune magic, and ancient Germanic rites, searching for patterns that could be folded into modern ideology. One division produced charts predicting personality by date of birth. Another compiled lists of sacred symbols for use in monuments and insignia. Himmler himself kept an astrologer on staff, though he dismissed any prediction that contradicted his plans. The blending of science, mysticism, and propaganda created a strange atmosphere inside the Reich. Officially, the Nazis condemned fortune-tellers and occultists as charlatans. Unofficially, many senior officers consulted them. The propaganda ministry used astrology to time announcements. Goebbels ordered pamphlets on ancestral spirit and Nordic destiny to be distributed alongside military bulletins. What began as ritual theater for loyalty became in time a shared superstition. This spiritual architecture served a practical purpose. By giving the movement sacred symbols, the leadership made obedience a form of worship. The swastika, lifted from ancient carvings and inverted for movement, was not only a logo, it was a spell. Every flag that waved beneath it turned politics into liturgy. Rallies became mass ceremonies, light, rhythm, and unity replacing thought with emotion. The regime did not need to believe its myths completely. It only needed its people to. Yet inside the upper circles, belief was real enough. Himmler spent hours reading medieval chronicles, convinced that hidden codes linked the SS to the ancient kings of Atlantis. He ordered the cataloging of every rune, every legend, every trace of sacred geometry that might confirm his vision. He spoke often of reincarnation, certain that he and his officers were the reborn souls of Germanic heroes. In private letters, he wrote that death in battle was not an end, but a return to the ancestral source, the Urgrund, the origin of power. Other leaders mocked him quietly, but none opposed him. The ritual gave the SS cohesion, pride, and the certainty that they served a cause beyond mortality. To challenge that was to challenge faith itself. By 1943, as the war turned against Germany, the occult order became more desperate. Ceremonies grew darker, invoking sacrifice and endurance instead of victory. Himmler ordered a new translation of the Edda, the Norse epic poems, to be distributed among SS officers as spiritual reading. He believed that understanding the sagas would prepare them for the twilight of the gods, the Ragnarok, and for rebirth after destruction. In that twilight, reality and myth fused completely. Reports from within Wewelsburg describe gatherings where officers swore oaths before torches, pledging loyalty unto death and beyond. The sound of chanting echoed through the stone halls, while outside, the Allied bombers drew closer each night. The black sun on the floor became a symbol not of eternity, but of collapse. When the war finally neared its end, Himmler ordered that all sensitive materials be destroyed. Documents were burned, artifacts removed, and the castle prepared for demolition. Before SS troops could carry out the order, American forces reached Wewelsburg. The North Tower had been blown apart. The crypt lay open and empty. The ashes of countless papers drifted through the hall. Nothing of the ceremonies remained but silence and stone. After the war, investigators uncovered fragments of the Ahnenerbe archives, lists of runes, astrological charts, sketches of rituals, but little that explained the full depth of what had occurred. What survived was the architecture of belief, a warning written in stone, a reminder that when ideology wraps itself in sacred symbols, reason becomes a prisoner of faith. The occult within the Reich was never simply superstition. It was structure, a system for binding minds through myth. It transformed murder into destiny, obedience into purity, and war into ritual. Its ruins still stand in Westphalia, the stones of Wewelsburg scarred but unbroken. Visitors walk its corridors quietly, feeling the weight of what those walls once held. A faith without mercy, a myth without soul. In the spring of 1945, the world that Hitler and Himmler had built began to die. The cities of Germany were in ruins, the armies in retreat, and the myths that had once bound millions together were dissolving under the sound of gunfire. But inside the bunkers and fortresses, among the archives of the SS and the halls of Wewelsburg, there remained the last believers, men who still whispered of destiny and rebirth, even as their empire burned. When Allied forces reached Wewelsburg Castle in April, they found the North Tower blasted open and the crypt blackened by fire. Scattered among the rubble were fragments of documents, charred pages covered in runes, and diagrams of stars. The walls bore scorch marks, as if someone had tried to erase a religion from stone. No relics were left, no secret treasures or artifacts of power, only silence. The physical heart of the Occult Reich had been destroyed, but its mythology was just beginning a second life. Across Germany, The members of the Ahnenerbe were hunted down. Many were arrested and interrogated, their research confiscated and classified. At Nuremberg, the organization was declared criminal, its archives sealed. Yet some of its scholars escaped prosecution by presenting themselves as ordinary scientists. They were absorbed into universities or fled abroad, taking their notes and ideas with them. Those ideas about ancient civilizations, lost technologies, and hidden energies did not die with the regime. They began to spread quietly into the post-war world. In the years that followed, as the world tried to understand how such destruction had been justified, people turned to the strange stories left behind. Reporters found traces of Himmler's expeditions, rumors of lost relics, and sketches of ritual chambers. To a generation still reeling from war, these fragments seem to hint at something larger, darker, a supernatural explanation for a human catastrophe. Writers began to merge history with myth, describing secret societies, magical weapons, and Nazi contact with ancient powers. It was easier to imagine evil as mystical than to confront it as human. By the 1950s, the legend of Nazi occultism had taken root. In pulp magazines and early documentaries, the Ahnenerbe became a codename for hidden knowledge. Himmler's obsession with runes was rewritten as sorcery, his castle as a temple of black magic. The myth spread far beyond the facts, but the facts themselves were strange enough to sustain it. Researchers who examined the surviving archives discovered that the Nazi fascination with the occult had indeed influenced the structure of their propaganda. They found documents describing plans to build sacred sites along energy lines in Germany, reports on the use of ancient symbols for psychological effect, and studies on how ritual could strengthen obedience. The regime had treated belief as a weapon, and that weapon had proven effective. After the war, Allied intelligence quietly studied those techniques. Psychological warfare specialists analyzed Nazi use of color, sound, and symbol. They learned how ceremony and myth could control crowds, how architecture could command emotion, how a symbol repeated enough times could replace truth itself. The research that had once been dressed in runes and astrology now became the foundation of modern propaganda theory. The occult of the Reich had mutated into the science of persuasion. Meanwhile, in popular culture, the myths grew wilder. Stories emerged of secret Nazi bases in Antarctica, of hidden relics stored in mountain caves, of submarines carrying the Grail to South America. Some claimed that SS officers had fled with sacred artifacts, founding new brotherhoods devoted to continuing the occult mission. Most of these stories were fantasy, born from fragments and fear. But they revealed something real, a lingering fascination with the idea that knowledge itself could be power, and that somewhere that power had not yet been lost. In West Germany, journalists traced a few surviving Ahnenerbe members who still met quietly, discussing ancestral heritage and cosmic order. In South America, fugitives from the Reich carried copies of their research, exchanging it among fringe nationalist groups. The language of destiny and purification lived on, stripped of its swastika, but not its meaning. The myth had outlived the men who created it. By the 1960s and 1970s, as new generations questioned official history, the story of Nazi occultism returned again, this time through film, novels, and conspiracy theories. Writers drew on real expeditions to Tibet, the relic hunts in France, and the burned halls of Wewelsburg to build a genre of hidden history. To audiences seeking mystery in a rational world, The idea that an empire could rise through magic and belief was irresistible. They turned the crimes of the Reich into legends of secret power, blurring the line once more between history and myth. Yet behind those legends remained a deeper truth. The Nazi obsession with the occult was never about magic. It was about meaning. It was an attempt to fill a spiritual void with myth, to turn symbols into certainty. The runes, the relics, the rituals, they gave men who felt powerless a sense of destiny. They made brutality seem sacred, conquest seem ordained. That is what made them dangerous. In the ruins of Wewelsburg today, the black sun still gleams faintly on the floor of the North Tower. Visitors walk in silence, tracing the lines with their eyes. It is no longer a temple, only a museum. But even as light filters through the broken windows, the air carries the memory of belief, the kind that turns faith into obedience and symbols into commands. The Allied soldiers who entered the castle in 1945 could not have known that the ideas born there would continue to echo through history. They destroyed the relics, but not the desire behind them. The human need to find order in chaos, to imagine that power can be holy. That need is older than the Reich, and it will outlive it. The Occult Reich fell with its armies, its leaders dead or captured, its rituals burned away. But the legacy of its mythology still lingers, in books, in rumors, in the fascination that surrounds every story of hidden power. It reminds us that when myth and ideology become one, truth disappears, and humanity follows it into the dark. That is the final lesson of the Occult Reich, that evil does not always hide behind monsters or magic. Sometimes it hides behind belief,